nature keeps revealing through different people a tool, and then the people keep using the tool for destruction.
We're trying to tell the future by looking at the past.
The first thing to do is to understand in your heart and mind what's going on. Before you start taking actions, see, who am I? In what world do I exist? In what system do I exist? What forces are acting upon me? And then I can know how to behave.
We are not just talking about theories, we're talking about an opportunity to make a big change, to make a big shift.
The Jew saw them all, beat them all, and is now what he always was. All things are mortal but the Jew. All other forces pass, but he remains. What is the secret of his immortality?
Okay, listen, enough of that This is a podcast, and we're not going to try to find, we're going to find the solution to anti-Semitism, okay? We're going to stop that right here, right now, from this stinking basement. When we get to the bottom of this, we're going to read from this mystery book, which you're not going to find out about until the end of the series, and we're going to really entertain every perspective. We're not going to say, oh, you can't say this, you can't say that. No, we're going to say everything. Because if we're not going to be able to talk about it, we're not going to be able to solve it. We're going to really grab you in the kishke and we're going to squeeze until we get something, right? Either a bowel movement or a freaking solution. We want to know what happened 3,500 years ago in Babylon that started this whole mishugas, and we want to finish it here in 2020. That's it. So you think it's inevitable that things will get strange?
By strange, you mean?
Strange. Like, you look outside, you have the world dealing with the virus, you have half the world believe that it's real, another half believes it's not real. Meantime, you have social unrest happening, half the country believes in one movement, the other half believes in another movement. The polarity, the mistrust. It's almost like everybody were thrown into a state of masspsychosis.
I think for humanity that sometimes when the question is too big, you can't deal with it. I think that happens in all kind of trauma. Like if I'm going to survive, I can't actually deal with the truth because the truth is so overwhelming and potentially life-altering that I have to...
You have to cover it up somehow.
I have to. The advertising does an amazing job.
Advertising does do an amazing job. I was offered 3 different cars just on the way over to you when I was listening to SoundCloud. It was great. It almost made me forget that no one is driving anywhere and people barely have money to eat, and soon we're going to see trucks handing out rice portions on street corners. But I don't want to start on such a negative note. I think this is a time of great change. You have another podcast that talks about this change, the great transition. We can plug it, I think. Everything is changing. I'm just trying to find out if these changes are inevitable. Like, why couldn't we just continue to exist as we existed? Yes, the Jews were not the most popular, but they weren't the worst. We had our place in the world. We had our...
You know what's very interesting, I see this all the time when I speak to my family. I see this all the time in business. We look at life in terms of our life. Politicians have been corrupt since time immemorial. No, only the last few thousand years, actually. Because before that we were monkeys, or like it's always been like this. No, it hasn't always been like this. Grandma was, living in a small village somewhere. It hasn't. Everything is so relative to the moment, and today everything is totally relative to where I stand in this moment, as if there's no past and as if there's no future.
It's one big terrible now.
Yeah, I mean, if we really lived as if what I'm doing now is going to affect my future and affect my children's future, we would modify our lifestyle. We wouldn't every single day be throwing more, throw more garbage into the ocean.
Well, maybe it's hard, but advertising makes such a good case for buying stuff and throwing the old stuff, and everybody around me is doing it. It's kind of...
If you look at the truth like your first question, in a very sober way, if you zoom out, then... everything is just patterns. It's just like a baby grows. And nobody wants to look at their death, but when you're born, as soon as you go into school, maybe when you get to a certain age, they teach you, okay, so a baby grows like this, then he doesn't know how to speak, then he learns, then he goes like this, then he does this, then he has a family, and then he dies. And then again. And you give a person a map of the life. If you also taught history in the same way, here's how humanity works. We develop some kind of government. Then there's the people in that system who didn't get taken care of rise up. It changes. You would see patterns in everything in nature.
It's true. It was a trick question. I knew that answer.
I had a feeling you did.
Well, this is the Jew function, and we're trying to find out the function of the Jews, but by doing it, we're also trying to find out the function of everyone else, because our function is not detached from everyone else's function. If anything, it's even more connected with everyone else's, and I think that's why people react to Jews the way they react. It's almost like everybody's more connected to a Jew than to maybe other parts in society, in humanity. It's like the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. Why is it bacon? It's
Kevin Turkey Bacon.
Kevin Turkey Bacon. It's that idea that we do exist in a system. And I think today, in our episode today, I want us to talk more about the system. I want us to zoom out a little bit. I think everybody got really enmeshed with this book and where it's going and what it's doing. I want us to maybe be reminded of the fact that this book is happening, inside human civilization, inside human history. Everything else is also moving alongside what's happening in this book, what's happening to these people. These patterns affect the Jews, but also non-Jews. There's so many big forces operating on us. And maybe today we can look at some of those forces. We can look at what's motivating the system. Who's actually making decisions for us? Who decided that 2020 is going to be the year of weird?
Wow, can you imagine all of a sudden all these fires in California, for example? It's like, what?
Yeah, it was such a good year up until that moment.
No, but it's like, it's almost like ironic.
Fires, hornets, earthquakes, volcanoes.
There was an earthquake here this week.
I know, tsunamis.
In New Jersey, there was an earthquake.
There was an earthquake in New Jersey, believe it or not. Everywhere you look, so much weird stuff is happening. And that's why I was asking, maybe it's not a coincidence. Maybe when you feel that the whole thing is moving, then the question is not, why am I uncomfortable? It's more like, why is this whole thing moving?
Very, very unique thing about our podcast here, about this book here, this mystery book. The same way that people look at life as this moment, people look at anti-Semitism, even if they're looking at more than just this moment, maybe they look at this, it's the longest standing hatred. Or if we zoom out enough, there is a very, very clear pattern that involves all of humanity.
You know what the funny thing is? If you ask anyone if they want to know their future, if you, like, would you like to go to a fortune teller who will tell you your future? Kind of in theory, everybody say, yeah, I want to know the future, right? But when someone actually comes and tells you, look, this is what's happening, this is where you are, this is where your future is going to be, like, whoa, I didn't ask for that future. I just want to know if I'm going to get this car or that car, if I'm going to get married to this girl or this girl. I don't want to know about the future with a capital F. But that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to tell the future by looking at the past.
We're trying to tell the future by looking at the past.
We're trying to understand where we are. That's what we want to do today. We want to understand where we are.
It takes a lot of responsibility because when you don't want to look at the truth, the reason why you don't want to look at the truth, first of all, because what am I going to do about it? It's so big, so what am I going to do about it? So if all of a sudden we reveal there's a pattern here, right? I'd rather almost be in oblivion than to understand what's going to happen, because if it's going to happen, it requires me to do something.
Right.
And what am I supposed to do? Yeah, that's it. It's like being a baby all over again and having to be born into a world. I don't know what the rules are, how this thing's supposed to operate.
Well, thank God for TV that was telling us what to do. And now, thank God for TikTok is telling us what to do and what to listen to and how to dress up.
So the pattern is that we're headed towards some next war, or we're headed towards some next calamity or something like that.
So that's the question. Can we stop it? Because I'm from advertising. My background is in advertising. I like to look at advertising. It is the mother of all evil in a way, but it could also maybe can clue us in. Maybe because advertising had it figured out so well, it was such a well-funded machine for understanding human nature, if you think about it. Maybe we can use it to unlock some of the...
I thought it would be so amazing if you could just brainwash everyone instead of brainwashing everyone to be a dope and buy crap that's going to break in 6 months? Can you just brainwash everyone to love each other?
I think we need to wash our brains, Seth. I think that's exactly what we need to do. We need to wash our brains and start fresh. But in order to do that, we need to understand where we are in the system. And that's why I wanted to bring today also to the episode, the fourth turning. Okay,
fourth turning.
The fourth turning. Yeah, so by the way, if you've heard about it before and you heard about it in some political context, just forget about it. We don't care about that, as you know. We care about the science. And the science behind it is rooted in market research. So two guys, they're Jews. Okay, they're Jews. But two guys, they looked at generations. Right? When you work in advertising, everybody knows, are we selling this to the boomers, to the Gen Xers, millennials, the Gen Z, 25, 45, are they men, women, what they like, what they do. So that's what these people do. They created these segments in the market of the generations. And when they were doing that, they started to see that these generations, they don't just happen to be layered one on top of the other. They have a relationship. They influence one another. They're part of, you guessed it, a system, and they're responding to the influence of one another. So if your parents told you, don't do this, don't do that, and you grow up eventually like, maybe I should do this.
Yeah, I mean, if I grew up in World War II, right, so I'm going to have a feeling about life. If I was 18 years old during, I guess our audience is mostly American, if you grew up during the Vietnam War, you're going to have an outlook towards life. But then what happens now, very interesting, this may have something to do with what you're going to say. Basically, most people today didn't have to fight in a war or didn't have to deal with a world war. If you dealt with a world war, so you don't want to do that again. Which,
interestingly, is what Jews have. We do have very good record keeping of all the terrible things that happened, which you would think would help us avoid additional terrible things from happening to us. We're not,
and not only that, we read it every year. Every year the Purim story. Every year the Hanukkah story.
Exactly. Well, maybe we gotta break the pattern. Let's see. So these guys behind the fourth turning theory, the theory of generation, which not to be confused with the theory of generations. It's called the fourth turning. It's called the Strauss-Howe generational theory, also known as the fourth turning theory, or simply the fourth turning. You can read about it in Wikipedia, obviously. But essentially, they're talking about cycles. They're talking about cycles in nature and in our human society. They talk about these roughly 20 to 22, 20-something years long generation. Each generation makes up a turn, right? And 4 generations make a cycle.
80 years.
80 years, roughly 80 years. It could be 90. It also depends on, obviously, on how long people live and all that. But there are 2 different types of eras and 2 formative age locations associated with them. So childhood and young adulthood produce 4 generational archetypes that repeat sequentially in rhythm with the cycle of crises and awakening. That's how they define it. So you have crisis and you have an awakening. Like, there was a war. Let's not have another war. Awakening. Okay, so it's like that. They refer to these 4 archetypes as idealist, reactive, civic, and adaptive. It's not going to be a test, so don't worry about it. In the fourth turning, they changed the terminology to prophet, nomad, hero, and artist. So let's look at what we have: prophet, nomad, hero, and artist. Okay, those are nice names. And we're talking about the baby boom generation from around, they were born after the war, right? Baby boom through the 60s. Then you have the nomad, which is the Gen X. They reacted to the ideals of the baby boomers, the prophets. Then you have the millennials. Those are the more civic, the heroes. And then you have Generation Z, the ones who were just born about 15 years ago. Okay,
the ones who are kind of scared from the war. then they are the hippies. They grew up, they became the yuppies.
So if you want to apply it, So let me read it for you. The prophet generations enter childhood during a high, a time of rejuvenated community life and consensus around a new societal order. Right? They grew up right after the war. Think about it. It's beautiful. It's like a time of rejuvenation.
Everyone's going to work.
The economy is up. Prophets grow up as the increasingly indulged children of this post-crisis era. Right? Oh my God, our parents had the war. We don't have the war. It's so nice. It's amazing. Then they come of age as self-absorbed young crusaders of an awakening. And they focus on morals and principles in midlife and emerge as elders guiding another crisis. So those are the boomers. Then you have the nomads. The nomads are the reactive generation. They enter childhood during an awakening. So this is already the time in the big cycle where society already reached a certain awakening. It's a time of social ideals and spiritual agendas. All the Gen Xers were born right at the height of the 70s revolution, 60s, 70s revolution.
It's also they're the children of all of those boomers, right?
They're the
So they have all of this time to get into yoga and drugs and this.
So when young adults are passionately attacking the established institutional order, that's that time. Nomads grow up as underprotected children during this awakening, come of age as alienated post-awakening young adults, become pragmatic midlife leaders during a crisis, and age into resilient post-crisis elders. If you think about it, Gen X were kind of like, they didn't have what the boomers had. They didn't have that revolution. They were just born into the corporation. I'm just going to be born to work. If you remember that film, the Reality Bites film with Winona Ryder, and
yeah,
it's like, what's happening? Why our parents are so terrible? Why don't they just give me a key and let me fend for my... It's like, nobody wants you. It's really that kind of sensation of that generation. Apparently it happens every time, and it's not just the Gen Xers. Then you have the heroes, the civic generation. They enter childhood after an awakening.
Is that us?
No, that's millennials. Oh. Well, you and I, Seth, for the listener, I find that I'm associated more with millennials. I think we're right on the cusp between X and millennials, and I think I associate more with millennials, probably you too, by our mindset. Here, let me read you about the civic generation. You'll see. They enter childhood after an awakening, during an unraveling. So we already are born into an unraveling of something. By the time I figured out, the 90s and everything, it was like already going downhill. It's like, I'm going to come to New York and make a lot of money. It's already... So it's a time of individual pragmatism.
Internet business.
Exactly. Self-resilience and laissez-faire. Heroes grow up as increasingly protected post-awakening children. Protected, right? Come of age as team-oriented young optimists during a crisis. That's what you see. A lot of those protests, when you have the millennials in them, they're the ones who, if you remember Occupy, that was...
Just thinking.
Right? That was a millennial, like, we can do it together, that thing. And they emerge as energetic, overly confident midlifers and age into politically powerful elders attacked by another awakening.
They didn't grow up with any war. They just grew up with like an inner angst.
Yeah, they're overprotected, but they already see the next crisis coming.
Without the experience of having...
Without the experience of the boomers, yeah. And then the artist generation entered childhood after an unraveling, during a crisis, a time when great dangers cut down social and political complexity in favor of public consensus, aggressive institutions, and an ethic of personal sacrifice. Look, this generation, your kids, they're born into this crisis, the corona crisis, the world is changing. Everything is just completely...
Yeah, 3 years ago, my kids were like normal kids, and now they're like been through a global pandemic. They've been through race riots.
Exactly. Great dangers cut down social and political complexity in favor of public consensus. So that's the movement. Aggressive institutions and an ethic of personal sacrifice. Artists grow up overprotected by adults, preoccupied with the crisis. Come of age as the socialized and conformist young adults of a post-crisis world. That's where they will come of age, and then break out as process-oriented midlife leaders during an awakening, and age into thoughtful post-awakening elders. So I just want to say, if you look in history, these guys did their homework and they went through the medieval cycles, the Reformation cycle, the New World in the late 1500s, the Revolutionary cycle.
There's a pattern.
And every cycle ends with here's what we're getting to. Every cycle ends with a crisis, with a big crisis, which just goes to prove the theory. You have the, American Revolution. That was the end of the revolutionary cycle, it was called. Then you have the Civil War cycle, which ends with the Civil War. Then you have the Great Power cycle, which ends with the Great Depression, World War II. And now we have our cycle. Ends with the War on Terror, Great Recession, COVID-19. And
okay, so if we're looking just at the moment, right? So that's basically when you pick up the New York Post every morning, you look at the headline. Oh, he did this today. Oh, he did that today. Oh, she did that. She went into a hair salon. Oh, that fires.
Right? I love that hair salon, yeah.
There's no past. There's no future. Everything is just in reference.
It seems
to what
random.
I feel.
It seems random, right?
Another moment like that. Oh, another I can't believe he did that. Oh, I can't believe she did that. Wow. It's amazing that is what our newspapers, what our media is giving us is like a snapshot. Like if you snapshot inside your body, There's like trillion viruses and all this. No, look, zoom out. You got a whole thing, a whole system going on.
And then you zoom out some more. You just see this plant with like this big organism called humanity.
Yeah.
Just crawling on it, changing, having little food over resources, and gradually, hopefully waking up to something.
That's also, it's a very, very interesting point when people always ask, like, what do we do? What do we do? How do we do? The first thing to do is to understand in your heart and mind what's going on. Before you start taking actions, see, who am I? In what world do I exist? In what system do I exist? What forces are acting upon me? And then I can know how to behave.
So the question is maybe, why do we need a crisis? And I guess that's how the system kind of brings back everything to a balance. When you're born, it's a probably traumatic experience. Right?
Sure.
I'm in the womb, everything is going great. And suddenly like water breaks and I'm like, every big change is
puberty, everything.
It's a crisis in a way. Right, opening the eyes for light to come in, it's a big crisis. It's a shock, but that's how we grow up. That's how we develop. That's first of all.
If the New York Post was there, it'd be like, baby was comfortable, and then the cruel mother brought him into the world.
Right.
And can you believe it? And then the doctor stuck a needle in him, and can you believe it? Yeah.
Exactly. And now he's suing his mom. So we're at a time, we're right on the cusp. This is what makes this, I think, program especially important, because we are not just talking about theories, we're talking about an opportunity to make a big change, to make a big shift. This is something that not every generation has the luxury to live through. Sometimes you're in the middle of something, you just have to trudge along, like those poor Gen Xers. But here we are, at the height of this cycle, we're ready for a big transition. And it could be a transition to something amazing. And maybe even breaking that cycle altogether, who knows? But we're not done yet, because we just wanted to bring this to show that there is a pattern, that things don't just happen randomly. Even if on an individual level it might feel like that, there's always a crisis. And the question is, what is our role in these processes? I want to go further back, right before the boomers, so the end of the previous cycle, okay, which is where we are in the book, more or less. We're entering, it's the late 30s, we're entering into Germany, and we're reading a mystery book, right? This is not a social studies program. We're reading a book about the Jews. And here you have, as it happens, another Jew who has an amazing role to play, I guess, in this.
You're talking about somebody specific?
I'm talking about somebody specific,
okay.
Yeah.
In the 30s?
In the 30s, yeah.
Okay.
I'm talking about someone specific in the 30s who basically is, in many ways, he's the father. I don't want to give him too much agency because we said we live in a system, but through him, a lot of the world that we know today, it was shaped through this one person. This one person is the nephew.
Roy Kroc, who made Ronald McDonald?
Close. Is the nephew of Sigmund Freud. So Sigmund Freud, everybody knows Sigmund Freud, right?
Sure, Freud.
The father of psychoanalysis. And he had all these great theories about human society. He too felt this constant struggle between the individual and the collective. Even though he wasn't a religious Jew, even though he didn't study what we are trying to do here. But like every Jew, he had these questions inside of him. Something did not reconcile, and he started to come up with these theories. They were not perfect because he was kind of looking at them from the bottom, trying to make sense of what's going on in the second floor. But they had a grain of truth in them, that relationship between the individual and the collective. That was at the heart of this dynamic tension that we exist in. And he wrote down all these theories, and he went through, the second half of his life was pretty terrible. And I think I remember Napoleon's granddaughter saved him from the camps. You know that?
I didn't know that.
Yeah. She gave 2 castles for him. And the Nazis said, yeah, you can have your Jew for 2 castles. But it's not about Freud. It's about his nephew, Edward Bernays. Edward Bernays was here working on the propaganda, in the part of the propaganda machine that helped send people to the war, the first war. He was in that office working
in the United States.
In the United States, getting a very peaceful nation.
He understood psychology.
He didn't understand. First of all, he realized the power of the masses. He realized what it means to communicate to the masses and to see these changes on the level of the masses, and how a whole country, which was essentially a pacifist country, got drawn into the war. And then he started to read the books of his nephew. He would send him some money.
Who started reading the books of his nephew?
At Bernays, he sent Freud.
His uncle.
His uncle, yeah. He sent him some money because he was having a hard time in Europe at the time. And Freud sent him his book on psychoanalysis. And he read about the psychosis of the mass psychosis, about those unconscious desires inside the people, inside the masses, and how someone needs to work with those desires. If you just leave them be, people can become animals. They saw it in the First War. They saw what barbarity can come. And he's like, no, we got to help them. So he goes and he starts would later be the Office of Public Relations. So he changes propaganda into PR. All of a sudden, it's like, oh, what are you working in? I'm working in propaganda. Oh, that's terrible. What do you do? Oh, I'm a PR agent. Oh, that's cool.
Bernays was determined to find a way to manage and alter the way these new crowds thought and felt. To do this, he turned to the writings of his uncle Sigmund. While in Paris, Bernays had sent his uncle a gift of some Havana cigars. In return, Freud had sent him a copy of his general introduction to psychoanalysis. Bernays read it, and the picture of hidden irrational forces inside human beings fascinated him. He wondered whether he might make money by manipulating the unconscious.
What Eddie got from Freud was indeed this idea that there is a lot more going on in human decision-making, not only among individuals, but even more importantly among groups, than this idea that information...
This is Pat Jackson. He's the founder of Jackson, and Wagner, and he worked with Ed Bernays on behavioral-based strategies on shaping public opinion.
And you see, that moved Eddie immediately into a different category from other people in his field and most government officials and managers of the day who thought if you just hit people with all this factual information, they would look at that and say, oh, of course. And Eddie knew that was not the way the world worked.
Bernays set out to experiment with the minds of the popular classes.
It's very interesting. Here you have a person who unwittingly feels the need to bring peace to the world. Just like all Jewish people have that inherently, right? As soon as they come out of the ghettos, they join the secular societies around them, they join the universities, they become the socialists, the leaders of revolution, because they feel we have to bring peace to the world. But how you do it, if you do it separately from that ideal of unity, then you get all these weird things. So Bernays says, let's use propaganda for peace, and he creates the Council on Public Relations. He basically ties Freud's ideas with the masses, and who is better suited to help mobilize the masses? Corporations. It's easy. It's like it's a match made in heaven. You want stuff from the masses, I want stuff from the masses. Let's bring peace to the masses. You'll get some money in the process. Everybody's happy. In those years after the war,
he understands how to motivate
the masses to do things. So he was
a car.
Yeah. By the way, for example, it was unpopular for women to smoke in public, and the tobacco company comes to him and is like, "Look, we're missing half the market. What do we do here?" But it's like, "I'll take care of it." So he knew there was going to be the Macy's parade. He knew the media is going to be there. He hired a few debutantes, young women, had them hide cigarettes in their, stockings and their bras and all that. And then he told the media people, it's like, look, something happening with women down there. He didn't tell them what. And all the eyes were on. And then when the ladies passed before the hall of the media bank, Bernays instructed them to take out their cigarettes and start smoking. All the media got their pictures. And it's important to say, he did it after he went to a psychoanalyst and tried to understand what would motivate women, what was at the heart of it. And he understood the connection to this phallic object and the control, the power it will give women. So that's why he did it in this way, in the way that will exude power and control. We are doing something outside in front of everyone, even though it was not allowed. So he had the ability to tap into those forces that are essentially operating inside of us. None of those people involved.
Hold on, there's a couple things going on here. First of all, you're saying this guy saw what happened with Wilson. You can rally the people behind something in wartime. So he says, let me see if I can rally the people during peacetime.
Yeah.
But now you're saying the whole thing just turned into selling stuff.
Because he realized that you need money. You can't do it without the money. So you get the captains of industry attached to it, and now you have the money. So they will have to sell their stuff. But if they can do it in order to preserve democracy, then it's all good. Everybody wins.
Because then everyone's an individual and everyone's free.
So you have
their life together in America, and
now that was happening at the end of a previous cycle. So he kind of fell into the World War and he disappeared during the war. He wrote a book called Crystallizing Public Opinion. That was in 1923, and in 1928 he wrote Propaganda. That was one of his famous books where he describes his ideas. Now, this show is not about Bernays. It's not about necessarily having some person outside here like, oh, yes, I told you Jews manipulate everything. No, it's not a conscious desire to control and manipulate people for their own profit. It's an expression of ideas that are coming into the world and people misusing them because
every time Einstein has a theory and then they use it to make a bomb.
Exactly.
Every single time.
So, right, it's just about how you're using it. And what we're saying is if you're not using it in connection with that ideal of unity, that's where everything falls apart.
Turns into a bomb.
Not only did it fall apart, guess who read Bernays' book? Who is a fan of Bernays?
Goebbels organised huge rallies whose function, he said, was to forge the mind of the nation into a unity of thinking, feeling and desire. One of his inspirations, he told an American journalist, was the writings of Freud's nephew, Edward Bernays. In his work on crowd psychology, Freud had described how the frightening irrationality inside human beings could emerge in such groups. The deep, what he called libidinal forces of desire, are given up to the leader, while the aggressive instincts are unleashed on those outside the group. Freud wrote this as a warning, but the Nazis were deliberately encouraging these forces because they believed they could master and control them.
So now the circle closes.
Wow.
And Goebbels takes Bernays' ideas and uses them to create the Nazi machine. The same ideas that were born after the war with Germany to bring peace to the world are now used by the same German machinery, version 2.0 of that machine.
Such an efficient nation.
Very efficient. Now we're back into the machine. We're in it. We're inside of it. And so the question is, how do we work with these things? Like, can we work with these patterns? Do we have free choice? Only Bernays had free choice back then. Only Goebbels has free choice. Like, who has free choice? What is our free choice here?
Einstein came up with this theory. They use it to make a bomb. Bernays figured out how to make everybody follow something, and it was used in order to destroy. Nature keeps revealing through different people a tool, and then the people keep using the tool for destruction. So the tools, these things that keep coming out, it doesn't matter that it's Bernays, it doesn't matter that it's Einstein, things pop up. Things come out. There's a way to deliver food and deliver items to everybody, and talk about Amazon, and then one guy decides to just like keep billions for himself. Nature constantly gives humanity what it needs in the moment, and if we don't use it correctly, these cycles keep turning naturally,
right?
And we keep corrupting them without unity.
And what we're saying also is that because Jews are people who were rallied around this deeper level of connection, they're able to have access to these ideas first. Because why? This is an important point. I think this is kind of the heart of this episode. In a way, Jews are more conscious than other people. Not only that, an interview with Professor Patterson, he said that the Jews make you uncomfortable. They force you to be awakened to what's going on. They don't let you sleep. And that's what annoys people. And it's not their fault. They can't help it. Jews are more conscious because they had that connection. That connection opened up for them a more direct channel with nature. It's like having stereoscopic vision in the jungle versus one eye in the jungle. Who do you think will be able to make better use of the jungle? Who do you think will be able to get around better in the jungle? The guy with the two eyes. So it's not even something that Jews today have worked for, but it's something that's inherent in that group somehow. We're not even going to go into how it's being passed. Is it genetic, environmental, social, whatever?
And who out there is a Jew who doesn't even know he's a Jew?
Exactly. Anyone who is more conscious, anyone who feels that there is this connection happening in the system of nature, is potentially a Jew. Now, if you're using that to create more connection between people, that's the real purpose of a Jew. If you're just using that to feed the usual human ego, the crazy thing is, we talked about Goebbels, and I know we didn't read from the book. I know people came for the book. We didn't get to read from the book, but we will say that just to create the climate for where we are in the book. If you remember last week, we talked about the rise of Nazi Germany, the animosity between different Jewish groups, the more religious one, Orthodox one in Poland, the more assimilationist ones in Germany, the Zionists that went to Israel. They didn't really. None
of them were friends, by the way.
What's that?
They weren't really friends.
They weren't really friends. Yeah,
these three groups.
This unity, which we read that Hitler took note of, and in that climate, the Nazi party is rising to power, and then Goebbels adds these ideas from Bernays that understood the masses and the mass psychosis, and what can you do with a mass psychosis, and that's exactly where we are today.
It's like so clear. It's so clear.
Well, I hope it's clear to everyone. We're going to read from the book. We're very close to finishing the book. We have a very tough period to go through with the book, so that's why I guess we're bidding our time a little bit. But on our next episode, we're going to talk about, sadly, more of that false or failed brotherhood of the Jews. We only want to talk about those things because we feel it's so important. It's super important right now at this point in time where everything can happen.
Study the patterns.
The masses are so mobilized, it can get bad really quickly. That's what I want people to understand. We hug everyone, and we will see you next week. Shalom.
Bye, everyone.